In the pre-dawn darkness of May 31st, 1944, a Japanese submarine commander faced a nightmare that would have broken lesser men. For 7 hours, Lieutenant Junichi Ino had fought for survival in the black depths off the Admiralty Islands. His submarine, RO-105, had dodged attack after attack. Hedgehog projectiles rained down from above like deadly hail. Depth charges thundered in the darkness. His crew was exhausted, his batteries nearly dead, his air fouled with carbon dioxide. But it was the ship that terrified him most. The Americans called her USS England, and she was coming for him again. Ino had heard the whispered reports over coded transmissions. 6 submarines sent to guard the NA line, 5 already gone, all in less than 2 weeks. The Americans had somehow found every position, attacked with mechanical precision, and left nothing but oil slicks and debris. Now it was his turn. What he couldn't know, what none of the doomed Japanese submariners could know, was that they were facing something unprecedented in naval warfare. Not just a ship, not just new technology, but the convergence of 3 revolutionary elements: cryptographic breakthrough, cutting-edge weaponry, and extraordinary human determination. Together, they would create the most lethal submarine killer in history. This is the story of USS England, a modest destroyer escort that accomplished what no warship before or since has matched, sinking 6 enemy submarines in just 12 days. It's a story that begins with sacrifice, unfolds with innovation, and ends with a strategic victory that helped doom an empire. The Japanese were right to fear that American ship, but they never understood why. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor, territory of Hawaii, 07:55 hours. Ensign John Charles England stood on the deck of USS Oklahoma, breathing the warm morning air of what should have been a peaceful Sunday. The 20-year-old officer had every reason to be happy. His wife had just given birth to their daughter 3 weeks earlier in Colorado Springs. He'd never seen the baby, never held her, never counted her tiny fingers. But photographs were coming, any day now. His wife and daughter would join him in Hawaii soon. He'd been counting the days. Then the torpedoes came. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor has been told countless times: the waves of aircraft, the burning ships, the chaos and death. But in that horror, individual acts of heroism often get lost in the larger narrative. What John England did that morning deserves to be remembered. Oklahoma took the first torpedoes at 07:52. 5 hits in rapid succession, each one a hammer blow that sent tons of seawater flooding into her vitals. The mighty battleship, veteran of World War I, began rolling onto her port side almost immediately. Men scrambled for escape routes as passages became death traps, as down became sideways, and then up. The screaming of tearing metal mixed with the screams of trapped sailors. England had been volunteering in the radio room that morning. He'd traded shifts with a friend, a married man with family visiting the islands. Let him spend time with his wife and kids. England could wait. His family would be here soon enough. When the torpedoes struck, England fought his way topside through flooding compartments and twisting passages. Oil-covered water rose around him. Emergency lighting flickered and died. In the radio room behind him, men were trapped. He could hear them calling out. He made it to the deck, saw the impossible scene unfolding. Japanese planes wheeling overhead, ships burning across the harbor, men in the water screaming for help. Oklahoma was capsizing beneath his feet. In minutes, she would be upside down, her hull exposed to the Hawaiian sun like the belly of some great dying beast. England could have jumped, should have jumped. Every instinct for self-preservation demanded it. Instead, he went back inside. 3 times he descended into that flooding tomb. 3 times he emerged with a trapped sailor, guiding them through passages that were rapidly becoming impassable. The ship groaned and shrieked around him. Bulkheads buckled. Water pressure turned corridors into deadly chutes. But England kept going back. On his 4th attempt to rescue his shipmates, Ensign John Charles England disappeared into USS Oklahoma's flooding interior and never came out. He was 4 days shy of his 21st birthday. Oklahoma finally settled on her side with 429 men dead or trapped inside. For days afterwards, rescue workers could hear tapping from within the hull, desperate SOS signals from men in air pockets. Salvage crews cut through thick steel to reach them, saving 32 souls. But for hundreds of others, including Ensign England, there would be no rescue. His body would remain entombed in the Oklahoma's hull for decades. When the battleship was finally refloated and scrapped, England was buried among the unknowns at Punchbowl National Cemetery. It wouldn't be until 2016, 75 years after his death, that advances in DNA technology would finally identify his remains and return him home to Colorado Springs, to be buried beside his parents. The Navy awarded him only a Purple Heart, no Navy Cross, no Medal of Honor. The chaos of Pearl Harbor meant many acts of heroism went unrecognized, but the Navy remembered John England in a different way. 2 ships would bear his name, a destroyer Escort built in 1943, and later a guided missile cruiser. The first would make his name legendary. May 13, 1944, Pearl Harbor, Territory of Hawaii, Fleet Radio Unit Pacific. The message was routine, just another intercepted Japanese naval transmission among thousands that flowed through FRU PAC's receivers every day. But to the trained eyes of American cryptanalysts, this particular message was gold. Submarine I-116 reporting to Commander Submarine Division 7. Estimated arrival off Bougainville, 2200 hours, May 22nd. Simple, straightforward, and utterly fatal. The breaking of Japanese naval codes stands as one of the great intelligence triumphs of World War II, though it would remain classified for decades after the war ended. While the Enigma codebreakers at Bletchley Park earned fame for cracking German codes, American cryptanalysts waged their own secret war in windowless buildings across the Pacific. The Japanese Navy's main operational code, designated JN-25 by American intelligence, was a complex system that combined codebook substitutions with additive encryption. Breaking it required not just mathematical brilliance, but linguistic expertise, cultural understanding, and educated guesswork. Teams of mathematicians, linguists, and puzzle solvers worked in shifts around the clock, feeding intercepts into IBM tabulating machines that clicked and whirred as they searched for patterns. Each broken message was a small victory. Each confirmed prediction proved the system worked. The triumph at Midway in June 1942 had been enabled by codebreakers who revealed Admiral Yamamoto's plan to trap the American carriers. Now, 2 years later, those same capabilities were being turned against Japan's submarine fleet. But there was a critical difference in May 1944. For the first time in the Pacific War, decoded intelligence was being shared directly with tactical anti-submarine forces. Previously, such information had been too sensitive, too valuable to risk compromising by using it operationally. The fear was always that the Japanese would realize their codes were broken and change them, cutting off the intelligence flow. By mid-1944, that calculation had shifted. American code-breaking capabilities were so advanced and Japanese naval codes so thoroughly compromised that the risk seemed acceptable. The potential payoff, destroying Japan's submarine scouting line before a major operation, was worth it. What FRUPAC discovered on May 13th was bigger than one submarine making a supply run. Additional intercepts over the following days revealed an entire submarine picket line being established across the Central Pacific, 7 submarines, designated positions forming the NA line from the Admiralty Islands north of New Guinea to Truk in the Carolina Islands. The strategic picture became clear. Japan was preparing for the next American offensive, but they didn't know where it would come. Would MacArthur's forces continue west along New Guinea? Would Nimitz's carriers strike the Western Carolines? Or would the target be the Marianas, Saipan, Tinian, Guam? those islands that would bring American B-29 bombers within range of Tokyo itself. The submarine picket line was Japan's early warning system. These boats would spot American carrier forces, report their heading and strength, and give the combined fleet time to respond. It was sound strategy. Submarines as scouts had proven effective in previous campaigns. But then the Japanese made a fatal error. When one of the submarines encountered an American aircraft, operational security took over. Orders went out for all 7 boats to shift position 60 nautical miles southeast of their original stations. And those orders, with specific coordinates for each submarine, were transmitted by radio. FRUPAC intercepted every message. The Joint Intelligence Center Pacific Ocean area went to work immediately. The coordinates had to be decrypted, then translated from the Japanese Navy's position-keeping system into standard navigation references. It was painstaking work, but by May 18th, the Americans had precise positions for all 7 submarines. The decision was made at the highest levels. Use this intelligence to destroy the NA line before the Marianas invasion began. The operation would be sanitized, attributed to aerial reconnaissance to protect the source, and it would be given to the best anti-submarine team in the theater, Commander Hamilton Howe's Escort Division 39. They called them Donald Ducks, the destroyer escorts of the U.S. Navy. The nickname was supposed to be insulting. These weren't the sleek greyhounds of the fleet like the Fletcher-class destroyers. They were smaller, slower, cheaper, built in commercial shipyards by workers who'd been making merchant ships a year earlier. But what the destroyer escorts lacked in glamour, they made up for in lethality. These were purpose-built submarine killers, and by 1944, they were the most effective anti-submarine platforms in the world. The Buckley-class destroyer escorts were born of desperate necessity. In 1942, German U-boats were winning the Battle of the Atlantic, sinking merchant ships faster than they could be replaced. Britain was starving. The convoy system needed escorts, hundreds of them, and fleet destroyers were too expensive, too complex, and took too long to build. The solution was the destroyer escort, a purpose-built submarine hunter that could be mass-produced using simple construction techniques and diesel engines instead of complex steam turbines. At 306 feet long and displacing 1,400 tons, they were nearly 100 feet shorter than fleet destroyers. Top speed was only 23 knots versus a destroyer's 35. But for hunting submarines, none of that mattered. What mattered was endurance, 10,000 nautical miles range versus a destroyer's 6,000. What mattered was sonar equipment as good as anything afloat. What mattered were weapons, depth charges, K-gun projectors, and the revolutionary Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar. 3 Buckley-class destroyer escorts would form the hunter-killer group dispatched to destroy the NA line: USS George, USS Raby, and USS England. Each ship carried the name of a fallen hero. Each crew carried the determination to honor that sacrifice. USS George bore the name of Seaman Second Class Eugene F. George, an anti-aircraft gunner aboard heavy cruiser USS San Francisco. On November 12, 1942, during the brutal night battle off Guadalcanal, George had stood his ground as a damaged Japanese bomber, already aflame from American fire, deliberately aimed for San Francisco's bridge. The kamikaze crashed into the cruiser's superstructure, killing Admiral Daniel Callahan and most of his staff. George died at his gun, still firing at the moment of impact. His Navy Cross citation spoke of extraordinary heroism and utter disregard for his own safety. USS Raby was named for Rear Admiral James Joseph Raby, a World War I anti-submarine warfare pioneer who had commanded the first American convoy escort across the Atlantic in 1917. Raby had helped develop the convoy tactics that defeated German U-boats in the Great War. He'd proven that properly escorted merchant ships could survive submarine attack. His theories, refined and expanded, would guide the destroyer escort program a generation later. And then there was USS England, DE 635, the ship that would make history. She'd been laid down at the Bethlehem Steel Company shipyard in San Francisco on July 2, 1942, just 7 months after the Pearl Harbor attack that killed her namesake. Workers who'd been building merchant ships and commercial vessels now turned their skills to warship construction. The destroyer escort program was ramping up to mass production levels. England slid down the ways on September 26, 1943, christened by Ensign John England's mother, Elizabeth. The elderly woman, still grieving her son nearly 2 years after Pearl Harbor, swung the ceremonial champagne bottle across the bow, with tears streaming down her face. She'd lost her boy, saving others. Now a ship bearing his name would hunt the enemy that had killed him. Lieutenant Commander Walton Barclay Pendleton took command when England commissioned on December 10, 1943. Pendleton was a Naval Academy graduate, class of 1932, with 11 years of service behind him. He'd served on battleships and cruisers, taught navigation at Annapolis, and completed anti-submarine warfare training in San Diego. At 33 years old, he was older than most destroyer escort captains, and he would prove to be exactly the right man for the job ahead. But if Pendleton was England's head, then Lieutenant John A. Williamson was her heart. The executing officer, second in command, was a Mustang, an officer who'd risen from the enlisted ranks. Williamson had joined the Navy as a teenager and worked his way through every rate on a destroyer. He knew seamanship in his bones. He understood the psychology of young sailors far from home, and he had an almost obsessive focus on training and drilling his crew to perfection. Under Williamson's relentless direction, England's crew would practice their attack runs until they could execute them in their sleep. Sonar operators drilled on recognizing submarine signatures. Plot teams practiced calculating firing solutions. Damage control parties ran exercises until their responses became automatic. The Hedgehog crew learned to load and train their weapon with mechanical precision. It was boring, repetitive work. The crew grumbled. But when the shooting started, they would thank Williamson for every drill, every critique, every demand for perfection. England's crew numbered 186 officers and men. Most were in their late teens or early 20s. Many had never seen the ocean before joining the Navy. Farm boys from Iowa, mechanics from Detroit, college students whose education had been interrupted by war, high school graduates looking for adventure or escape, or simply answering their country's call. They came from every corner of America, these young men, different backgrounds, different dreams, but aboard England, they would forge themselves into something remarkable, a crew so well-trained, so perfectly synchronized, that they would accomplish what no other ship's company ever had. The destroyer Escort spent her first months conducting training exercises off San Diego, then escorting convoys up and down the West Coast. Routine work, boring work, but essential work that let the crew learn their ship, learn each other, learn their trade. In April 1944, England departed for the Southwest Pacific. She was assigned to Escort Division 40, based at Purvis Bay on Florida Island in the Solomons. The war had moved west. MacArthur's forces were island-hopping along New Guinea's northern coast, while Nimitz's carriers prepared for the next great leap across the Central Pacific. But the Solomons remained a vital logistics base, and submarine threats still lurked in those waters. England quickly earned a reputation as a smart ship, well-trained, well-maintained, aggressive in her patrols. When Commander Howe needed ships for the NA Line operation, England was a natural choice. On May 18, 1944, England was temporarily detached from Escort Division 40 to join Commander Howe's task group. She rendezvoused with George and Raby, received her orders, and set course to intercept I-16. The crew knew something was up. The urgency was unusual. The specific coordinates they were given suggested solid intelligence rather than random patrol areas. But they didn't know about the code breakers, didn't know about Frupak's brilliant work, didn't know they were about to make naval history. They thought they were hunting one submarine based on aerial reconnaissance. They had no idea they were the tip of a spear aimed at Japan's entire submarine picket line. Mounted on England's foredeck, just forward of the bridge, sat a weapon that looked almost comical. A trainable platform studded with 24 stubby spigot mortars arranged in 6 rows of 4. The sailors called it the Hedgehog, and it resembled nothing so much as an oversized, deadly porcupine. But there was nothing comical about what the Hedgehog could do. This weapon, more than any other factor, would enable England's unprecedented success. Understanding why requires understanding the problem it solved. For 25 years, since World War I, anti-submarine warfare had been conducted essentially the same way. A surface ship would detect a submarine using sonar, sound pulses that bounced off the submarine's hull. The attacking ship would calculate the submarine's position, speed, and depth. Then it would sail over the submarine and roll depth charges off the stern. Depth charges were barrels filled with 300 to 600 pounds of TNT or Torpex explosive fitted with hydrostatic fuses that detonated them at preset depths. The theory was simple. Get enough explosive close enough to the submarine, and the pressure wave would crush its hull like an aluminum can. But the practice was frustratingly difficult. First, you had to calculate where the submarine would be by the time your ship reached the attack point, typically 30 to 60 seconds after you lost sonar contact. Submarines didn't cooperate by sailing in straight lines. They dove, turned, changed speed. Calculating the firing solution was as much art as science. Second, sonar only worked ahead of and to the sides of the attacking ship, not astern. Once you passed over the submarine to drop charges, you lost contact. You were firing blind, hoping the submarine was where you'd calculated it would be. Third, and this was the killer, depth charges detonated whether they hit anything or not. Each explosion created a massive disturbance in the water, turbulent cavitation, air bubbles, thermal layers disrupted. This acoustic chaos would blind the attacking ship's sonar for 10 to 20 minutes. You couldn't tell if you'd hit the submarine, couldn't track where it went, couldn't set up an immediate follow-up attack. During that period of blindness, a skilled submarine commander could escape, dive deeper, change course radically, go silent and drift with the current. By the time the water settled enough for sonar to work again, the submarine might be miles away. The statistics told the grim story. In the early years of World War II, it took an average of 60 to 100 depth charge attacks to sink one submarine. Most submarines detected by Allied forces escaped. The Battle of the Atlantic was nearly lost because German U-boats survived attack after attack. British scientists and naval officers, working under desperate pressure as U-boats strangled Britain's supply lines, began looking for alternatives. The Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, a wonderfully British name for a group tasked with inventing new ways to kill enemy submarines, came up with several concepts. One of them was the Hedgehog. The weapon was simple in principle, but revolutionary in effect. Instead of rolling charges off the stern, the Hedgehog would fire projectiles ahead of the attacking ship. Instead of using hydrostatic fuses that detonated at preset depths, each projectile would carry a contact fuse that only detonated on hitting something solid. Each Hedgehog projectile was a 65-pound teardrop-shaped bomb with a 35-pound warhead of Torpex explosive. The 24 projectiles would be fired in a carefully timed sequence so they hit the water simultaneously, creating an elliptical pattern roughly 140 feet by 120 feet. The projectiles would sink at 23 feet per second, slow enough to retain their pattern, fast enough to reach typical submarine depths in 7 to 10 seconds. The genius of the system became clear in actual use. The Hedgehog fired ahead, meaning the attacking ship maintained sonar contact throughout the attack.
If the projectiles missed, there were no explosions to blind the sonar. The ship could immediately set up another attack, maintaining continuous contact with the submarine. If even one projectile hit, the explosion was immediately apparent. And unlike a near-miss depth charge, a contact hit against a submarine's pressure hull was almost always fatal. The explosion, focused against the metal rather than dispersed in water, would breach the hull and send the submarine to the bottom. The reload time was only 3 minutes. Compare that to traditional depth charge attacks, which required at least 10 to 15 minutes between runs due to acoustic blindness and the time needed to regain contact. The psychological impact on submarine crews was devastating. With traditional depth charges, submariners could hear them splashing into the water above them, giving them a few seconds warning before detonation. They could try emergency maneuvers, could prepare for impact, could at least know death was coming. With Hedgehog, there was no warning. The projectiles splashed into the water silently, or at least quietly enough that submarine hydrophone operators usually didn't detect them. The sinking projectiles made no noise. The first indication a submarine crew had of an attack was the detonation of a Hedgehog projectile against their hull, and by then, it was far too late. The weapon had been deployed operationally by the Royal Navy in 1942, and American ships began receiving it in late 1943. By May 1944, it was still relatively new in American service. Many destroyer escorts hadn't received them yet, but George, Raby, and England were among the fortunate ones equipped with this revolutionary weapon.
Training with the Hedgehog required patience and practice. The firing solution had to account for the time it took projectiles to reach the target depth, the submarine's predicted movement, and the pattern dispersal. A good Hedgehog crew could calculate and execute an attack in about a minute from initial sonar contact. England's Hedgehog crew, under Williamson's relentless training regime, had become experts. They knew their weapon intimately, knew its capabilities and limitations, knew how to adjust for sea state and target depth, knew how to read the sonar returns and predict where a maneuvering submarine would be. Soon, they would get the chance to prove their skills against real targets, and those targets would have no idea what was coming for them. I-16 was no ordinary submarine. She was a veteran, a survivor, a killer. At 358 feet long and displacing 3,561 tons submerged, she was one of the largest submarines in the Japanese fleet, a Type C-1 cruiser submarine designed for long-range operations and special missions. She'd earned her place in history on December 7, 1941, when she launched one of the 5 midget submarines that attempted to penetrate Pearl Harbor. That midget submarine, crewed by Lieutenant Junior Grade Yokoyama Masaharu, had never returned, most likely destroyed by American defenses, though Japanese propaganda would claim a successful attack. I-16 herself survived Pearl Harbor, went on to launch another midget submarine attack at Diego Suarez, Madagascar, in May 1942. That one actually successful, damaging the British battleship HMS Ramillies. She'd run supply missions to Guadalcanal during that desperate campaign, dodged American destroyers in the slot, survived air attacks, earned 9 War Patrol insignia painted on her conning tower. Each patrol a story of hardship and danger. Now, in May 1944, I-16 was running supplies again. Rice in waterproof rubber bags destined for the starving Japanese garrison at Buin on Bougainville. 40,000 Japanese troops trapped there, bypassed by American advances, slowly dying of starvation and disease. The submarines were their only lifeline. Lieutenant Commander Takeuchi Yoshitaka commanded I-16 on what would be her final patrol. He was a careful officer, experienced, cautious. He knew American anti-submarine capabilities had improved dramatically since the war's early days, knew that every patrol might be his last. But orders were orders, and Japanese naval tradition demanded absolute obedience. I-16 departed Truk Lagoon on May 14th. Her transmission reporting departure was intercepted by American radio intelligence, decoded,
The message revealed her destination and estimated arrival time. Off Bougainville at 2200 hours on May 22nd. The hunter-killer group, George, Raby, and England, departed Purvis Bay on May 18th with Commander Howe embarked aboard George as tactical commander. They were given coordinates based on aerial reconnaissance reports. The three ships formed line abreast and began their sonar sweep. The cover story was important. If anyone on the destroyer escorts wondered how they happened to be in exactly the right place at the right time, the aerial reconnaissance explanation would satisfy them. No one below flag rank level would know that American codebreakers had gift-wrapped this target for them. The afternoon of May 19th was typical for the South Pacific. Hot, humid, with scattered clouds building toward their afternoon convection. The sea was moderate, a long swell rolling in from the southeast. Perfect conditions for submarine hunting. Calm enough for good sonar performance, but not so calm that submarines could see attacking ships from great distances. At 13:35 hours, England's sonar operator, sonar technician 3rd class Robert Thompson, hunched over his console in the ship's sound room. Thompson was 19 years old, from a small town in Iowa. Before the war, he'd never been more than 50 miles from home. Now he sat in a darkened compartment listening to underwater echoes, searching for death in the depths. The distinctive ping of the active sonar pulsed out rhythmically. Ping. Wait for the echo. Ping. Most returns were nothing. Biological noise, schools of fish, temperature layers. But Thompson had learned to recognize the subtle differences, the solid, clear return that meant man-made steel. Sonar contact, bearing 270, range 1,350 yards, Thompson reported, his voice carefully controlled despite the adrenaline spike. In England's Combat Information Center, the report electrified the watch team. Lieutenant Williamson, manning the con, acknowledged immediately. Classification. Thompson listened carefully to several return echoes. Submarine, sir. High confidence. This was it. First blood. Williamson called Captain Pendleton to the bridge. Captain to the bridge. Submarine contact. Pendleton arrived within seconds, coffee cup still in hand. What do we have? Solid submarine contact bearing 270, range 1350 and closing. Strong return, consistent movement. Assessment? Dived submarine attempting to evade. I-16 had detected the surface ships and crash-dived. Her hydrophone operators had picked up the sound of multiple propellers, the distinct thrashing of destroyer escort screws. Takeuchi ordered emergency dive procedures. Rig for silent running. Make turns for 6 knots. Go deep. But going deep wouldn't save him. England's sonar could track submarines to 600 feet, far deeper than most Japanese submarines could safely dive, and the Hedgehog could reach those depths easily. Pendleton gave the orders calmly. This is what they'd trained for. This was the moment all those boring drills in San Diego Bay had prepared them for. Set condition able throughout the ship. Man all Hedgehog stations. Plot, give me a firing solution. England turned to her attack heading, increasing speed to 15 knots, fast enough to close quickly, slow enough to maintain sonar contact. The attack team worked the problem. Target bearing, steady. Target range, decreasing. Target depth, 200 feet and increasing. In the sound room, Thompson called out ranges as I-16 tried to escape. Range 1,000 yards, 900 yards, 800 yards. The Hedgehog crew on the foredeck had loaded all 24 projectiles. Each one sat in its firing cup, the contact fuse armed and ready. Chief Gunner's mate William Richards commanded the Hedgehog team. Richards had been in the Navy since 1936, serving on destroyers before transferring to England. He'd helped train the crew and knew the weapon like he knew his own children. Hedgehog loaded and ready, sir, Richards reported over the sound-powered phone circuit.
The plot team finished their calculations. Submarine depth, 220 feet. Speed, 8 knots. Course, changing. The submarine was zigzagging, trying to throw off the attack. Recommended firing point in 30 seconds, the plotting officer called. Pendleton watched the second hand on his watch. Stand by, fire on my mark. I-16 turned hard to port, diving deeper. Takeuchi had seen action against American destroyers before, knew the tactics. The key was to turn inside the attacker's turn, throw off their calculations, change depth radically, break the sonar lock. But he didn't understand Hedgehog, thought the Americans were setting up for a standard depth charge run. Range 600 yards, Thompson called. Fire, Pendleton ordered. The Hedgehog launcher bucked 24 times in rapid sequence, each projectile arcing forward in a carefully calculated trajectory. The sound was distinctive, not the thunderous boom of the 5-inch gun, but a series of sharp coughs. Foot, 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 foot. The projectiles hit the water in their elliptical pattern 300 yards ahead of England. They sank through the clear Pacific water at 23 feet per second, spreading into their deadly pattern. Aboard I-16, the hydrophone operator reported splashing sounds. Takeuchi assumed depth charges. Brace for impact. But nothing happened. No massive explosions, no pressure waves, just silence. The first Hedgehog attack had missed. I-16's radical turn at the last moment had taken her outside the pattern. "Missed, sir," Thompson reported. "Maintaining contact. Target bearing 285, range 800 yards. Pendleton never hesitated. "Reload Hedgehog. Come right to 285. Stand by for another attack." 3 minutes. That's all the reload took. While the Hedgehog crew reloaded, England maintained contact. No acoustic blindness, no lost contact. The submarine was still right there on the sonar scope. I-16 continued her desperate evasion. Takeuchi was confused now. The Americans had attacked, but used no depth charges. Were they out of ammunition? Having equipment failures? Second attack run. England closed to 500 yards. Fire! Another spread of projectiles, another pattern sinking towards the submarine. Miss. I-16 dove deeper, turned hard to starboard this time. Reload! Maintain contact! The crew was finding their rhythm now. This was exactly like the drills Williamson had run. Track the target, calculate the solution, fire, reload, track again. They were doing everything right, but the submarine commander was good, and I-16 was a tough boat. Third attack. This time, one projectile connected. The explosion was sharp, different from a depth charge, more focused. The concussion rocked I-16 and water began flooding into her forward torpedo room, but her strong hull held. Damage control teams scrambled to shore up the breach. England maintained contact. "Submarine still maneuvering, sir. She's hurt but still fighting." Fourth attack. Miss. I-16 was turning so radically now she was nearly spinning. Takeuchi knew he was fighting for his life. But the submarine was slowing. The flooding forward was affecting her trim. Battery power was draining. Her evasions were becoming less effective. Fifth attack run. Pendleton's voice was still calm, still controlled. "This one counts. Make it good." The Hedgehog crew had learned from each previous attempt. They'd seen I-16's patterns, noticed she tended to turn to port when diving, preferred depth bands between 200 and 300 feet. "Range 450 yards, Thompson called. "Target depth 220 feet. Bearing 290. The plot team had it now. They knew where she'd be. Fire! Multiple projectiles found their mark. The underwater eruption was catastrophic. 6, maybe 7 direct hits. I-16's forward compartments disintegrated. The pressure hull breached in a dozen places. The submarine's bow section crumpled like paper. The explosion was so powerful, it lifted England's stern completely out of the water. Men on the fantail were thrown to the deck. Below, in the engineering spaces, machinery jumped on its mounts. In England's sound room, Thompson heard it all. The crunching of the submarine's hull, the rush of water, the internal explosions as seawater found I-16's batteries. Then, slowly, the sounds of the submarine breaking apart as she plunged toward the bottom. "Submarine destroyed, sir," Thompson reported quietly. 20 minutes later, the evidence rose to the surface.
An oil slick spread across the calm water, rainbowing in the afternoon sun. Rice bags, white rubber bags that had been destined for starving soldiers, bobbed up. Pieces of wood, cork insulation, pages from a book, the Japanese characters running as seawater soaked through them. A sailor's cap, a wooden sandal. Personal effects of men who would never go home. Pendleton stood on England's bridge, watching the debris field spread. 107 men had just died. Men doing their duty, serving their country, following orders. They'd fought hard, fought well, but in modern naval warfare, fighting well often wasn't enough. "Secure from general quarters," Pendleton ordered. "Well done, all hands." Commander Howe's signal light blinked from George. "Congratulations on the kill. Resume patrol." One submarine down, but intelligence said there were 7 more out there, and England was just getting started.
While I-16 was dying in the depths off Bougainville, 7 other Japanese submarines were taking up their assigned positions along the NA line. None of them knew that their positions had been compromised. None knew that American code breakers had read their orders down to the last coordinate. They were ghosts already, sailing into a trap that had been sprung before they even arrived. The NA line stretched from the Admiralty Islands to Truk Lagoon, roughly 600 nautical miles of ocean. Each submarine had a specific patrol area, about 50 miles square. The rigid affinement of positions was standard Japanese doctrine, but it was a fatal flaw. American submarines operated with flexible patrol areas, allowing commanders to move in response to conditions. Japanese submarines stayed where they were ordered, no matter what. All 7 submarines of the NA line were RO-class boats, type RO-100 submarines. Smaller than I-16 at 760 tons displacement, these were coastal defense boats pressed into service as fleet submarines because Japan simply didn't have enough boats for the missions being assigned. They were good submarines, well-built, with strong hulls and capable crews, but they were outmatched by the American anti-submarine forces hunting them. Most critically, they lacked radar. They had radar detectors that could sense when enemy radar was pinging them, but they couldn't search for enemies themselves. This meant they had to rely on visual lookouts, forcing them to spend time on the surface where they were vulnerable. The strategic concept behind the NA line was sound: create an early warning screen that would detect American carrier task forces and report their movements to the combined fleet. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, commanding Japan's naval forces, was expecting a major American operation. But where? MacArthur's forces had been leapfrogging along New Guinea's northern coast. The logical next target seemed to be the western end of New Guinea, or perhaps the western Caroline Islands. The Marianas, Saipan, Tinian, Guam seemed less likely. They were further from current American bases and closer to Japan's main defensive perimeter. The NA line submarines would provide the answer. When American carriers passed through their patrol areas, the submarines would radio contact reports and the combined fleet would sortie to meet them. Operation Go, the decisive battle that would turn the tide of war, would be fought. Except the Americans already knew every submarine's position, and they were coming to kill them all. RO-106 was the second submarine to die. She'd already compiled a combat record that included sinking the tank landing ship LST-342 off New Georgia in July 1943. That kill had been textbook: a periscope approach, careful setup, 2 torpedoes fired. One hit, and LST-342 had exploded so violently she broke in half. 121 men died, including the famous artist-turned-combat officer Lieutenant Commander Merlin Barclay. RO-106 had survived air attacks, dodged destroyers, completed multiple war patrols. Her crew was experienced, her captain careful, but careful wouldn't save her.
The night of May 21 to 22, 1944 was dark, new moon, with heavy cloud cover. Perfect conditions for a submarine running on the surface to recharge batteries. RO-106's diesel engines growled as they pushed the boat through the calm seas at 12 knots, generators humming as they pumped electricity back into the massive battery arrays below decks. On the submarine's bridge, Lieutenant Commander Shoichi Kusaka and his officer of the deck scanned the horizon with binoculars. The radar detector was silent, no enemy ships in range. This close to Japanese-held islands, they should be relatively safe. Should be. At 0350 hours, George's radar painted RO-106 at 14,000 yards, 7 nautical miles. The pip on the radar scope was clear, unmistakable. A submarine running on the surface. George's captain, Lieutenant Commander Fred Sanner, didn't hesitate. General quarters, all ahead flank. Illuminate target when we close to 5,000 yards. George surged forward, her diesels roaring. On her foredeck, the 5-inch gun crew stood ready. They probably wouldn't get a shot. Submarines could crash dive in less than a minute once they knew they'd been detected, but if they got lucky. At 5,000 yards, George's 24-inch searchlight stabbed through the darkness. The powerful beam caught RO-106 squarely, bathing her in harsh white light. On RO-106's bridge, the effect was stunning. One moment darkness, the next blinding light that destroyed their night vision instantly. Kusaka didn't need binoculars to see the destroyer Escort racing towards them. Crash dive, all ahead emergency. The dive alarm shrieked. Men on the bridge scrambled for the hatch. The diesels cut out, exhaust valves slamming shut. Electric motors engaged, pulling maximum amperage from the battery arrays below decks. Ballast tanks flooded. RO-106's bow dipped towards the water. George's guns opened fire, but too late. 5-inch shells splashed around the diving submarine, but RO-106 was already going under. 40 seconds from alarm to submerged, textbook performance. But George had her on sonar now. The crash dive had been noisy, giving away RO-106's exact position. Contact bearing 045, range 4,000 yards, George's sonar operator reported. Commander Howe, observing from George's bridge, signaled England and Raby to close in. Form attack line, prepare for coordinated attack. At 0415, George fired her first hedgehog salvo. Miss. RO-106 turned hard to port, diving deeper. At 0425, England gained sonar contact. Solid contact, range 1,000 yards.
Pendleton brought England in for her attack run. First salvo. Miss. RO-106 was zigzagging violently, changing depth every few seconds. Her captain was skilled, desperate, and fighting for his crew's lives. Then RO-106 made her fatal mistake. Perhaps trying to set up a torpedo shot, perhaps simply confused in the chaos, she reversed course and turned bow on to England. It was exactly what England's attack team needed. Instead of trying to hit a submarine crossing their path, they were shooting at a target coming straight toward them. The firing solution simplified dramatically. Fire! At least 3 projectiles hit, probably more. The explosions merged into a single catastrophic detonation that broke RO-106's back. Her forward compartments flooded instantly. The pressure hull failed at multiple points. She broke into sections as she plunged toward the bottom. 49 men died, some instantly, crushed by imploding bulkheads or killed by the concussion. Others drowned as compartments flooded faster than watertight doors could be closed. A few, trapped in air pockets, lived for precious seconds before the pressure hull collapsed entirely. The whole action, from first radar contact to final destruction, took 36 minutes. 2 submarines dead in 3 days. England had found her rhythm. May 23, 1944. Dawn breaking over the Solomon Sea.
RO-104 had spent most of her war in the cold, desolate waters of the North Pacific and Aleutian Islands. Now she was in the tropics, hunting for American carriers she would never find. Lieutenant Hisashi Ijachi commanded her. He was a veteran submariner who'd performed a remarkable rescue mission in November 1943, saving 75 survivors from the light cruiser Sendai as she was sunk in a night surface action. Among those rescued was Rear Admiral Baron Matsuji Ijuian, whose survival was considered vital to Japan's increasingly desperate naval situation. That rescue had been performed under the noses of American ships and aircraft. It had taken skill, courage, and luck. Ijachi had all three, but his luck was about to run out. At 0604 hours, an Allied patrol aircraft spotted RO-104 on the surface, recharging batteries after a night of submerged patrolling. The submarine's radar detector shrieked its warning, just as the lookout spotted the aircraft. Crash dive, again. But this time, 3 destroyer escorts were vectoring in based on the aircraft's contact report. The submarines of the NA line were being hunted systematically, and the hunters now had aerial support. By 0620, Raby had sonar contact. She moved in for the first attack run. But RO-104 had learned from her sister's deaths. Japanese radio intelligence had intercepted American transmissions reporting submarine kills. They didn't know the Americans had broken their codes, but they knew American anti-submarine tactics had become devastatingly effective. Ijachi employed every countermeasure in his arsenal: violent evasions, radical depth changes, and something new: transmitting bursts of tuned sound impulses designed to jam American sonar. Acoustic deception. It worked. Raby's first hedgehog attack missed. So did her second, and third, and fourth. For 2 hours, Raby pursued RO-104 through the depths. Each attack run looked perfect. Each ended in frustration as the submarine evaded at the last moment. Raby's crew was exhausted, frustrated, and beginning to doubt. Commander Ho signaled for George to take over. Fresh crew, fresh perspective. George made 5 hedgehog runs over the next 90 minutes. 5 misses. RO-104's captain was fighting brilliantly, maneuvering her submarine with precision that pushed both boat and crew to their limits. But each evasion drained the submarine's batteries. Each maneuver consumed precious electrical power. The air inside RO-104 was becoming foul, carbon dioxide building up as the life support systems struggled. Men were gasping, fighting headaches, moving sluggishly. At 0819, England moved in. Lieutenant Williamson had been observing the attacks for hours, noting patterns. RO-104 tended to turn to starboard when diving, preferred depths between 200 and 250 feet, accelerated just before making major course changes. "We've got this," Williamson told Pendleton. "I've seen what he's doing." First hedgehog attack, miss, but closer than the previous attempts. "He's tiring," Williamson observed. "His turns are slower, not as crisp. Batteries nearly dead." Second attack run. England's hedgehog crew adjusted their aim based on Williamson's analysis. Fire. At least 3 projectiles hit, probably more. The explosions merged into a roar that was heard by all 3 destroyer escorts. RO-104 broke apart under the hammer blows. Her pressure hull, already stressed by hours of extreme maneuvering, couldn't withstand multiple direct hits. The submarine imploded as she sank, compartments collapsing sequentially like a string of firecrackers. 58 men died. Ijachi went down with his boat, still at the con, still trying to save his crew. It was 10:45 before debris confirmed the kill. Oil, wood, cork, and a life ring with Japanese characters. The entire hunt had lasted more than 4 hours, but England had her third victim. 1 day later, May 24th, RO-116 died.
She was one of the newest submarines in the INA line. commissioned just 6 months earlier. Her crew was still learning their trade, still building experience. They'd completed one war patrol without significant contact. This second patrol was supposed to be routine. Take station, watch for American ships, report contacts. Instead, it would be their grave. At 0200 hours, George gained radar contact at the remarkable range of 17,000 yards, nearly 10 miles. Perfect atmospheric conditions had given the radar exceptional range. RO-116 was on the surface, batteries charging, completely unaware that death was racing toward her. Lieutenant Commander Shibuya Kuno ordered the crash dive as soon as lookouts spotted George's mast on the horizon. But the dive was slow, agonizingly slow by the standards of experienced crews. Young, inexperienced sailors were half a second slow on each valve, each procedure. Those half seconds added up. By 0215, George had sonar contact at just 750 yards, point-blank range for submarine hunting. RO-116 tried the same tactics as her predecessors: violent rudder shifts, depth changes, acoustic deception, but inexperience showed in execution. Their evasion patterns were predictable, their depth changes sloppy, their timing off. George made 2 hedgehog runs, both near misses. Commander Howe signaled England, "Your turn." England moved in at 0214. First attack run, aborted when the firing solution fell apart at the last second. RO-116 had turned inside England's turn. Second attack run, aborted again. The submarine was still fighting hard. Third attack run. England's team had the measure of RO-116 now. They'd spotted the inexperience, noted the predictable patterns. Fire. At least 3 projectiles struck home. Unlike previous kills, there were no secondary explosions. RO-116 simply broke apart quietly and sank, taking all 56 hands with her into the deep. 4 submarines dead, 4 in 5 days. But England wasn't done. May 26, 1944. Japanese 6th Fleet Headquarters, Saipan. Vice Admiral Takagi Takeo studied the intelligence reports with growing alarm. American radio transmissions, intercepted and partially decoded, spoke of multiple submarine kills north of the Admiralty Islands. The messages had an almost jubilant tone, unusual for routine patrol reports. The INA-line submarines had been ordered to maintain radio silence unless they spotted enemy carriers. But now, several weren't answering when called. I-116 had failed to deliver her supplies to Bougainville. RO-106, RO-104, and RO-116 weren't responding to status queries. The conclusion was inescapable. The Americans had found the INA line, and they were destroying it systematically. How? Takagi couldn't understand it. The submarine positions had been transmitted by secure code. The Americans shouldn't have those coordinates. Could Japanese radio security have been compromised? No. More likely, the Americans had simply gotten lucky with aerial reconnaissance and aggressive patrolling. Warning messages went out immediately on multiple frequencies. All INA line units, enemy anti-submarine forces operating in your area with unusual effectiveness. Exercise extreme caution. Consider relocation to alternate positions if tactically feasible. RO-1112 received the warning. Her captain immediately cleared the area, abandoning his assigned patrol station. It saved his life, temporarily. RO-112 would survive another 9 months before being sunk by USS Batfish off Luzon in February 1945. RO-109 also received the warning and escaped the killing zone. She too lived on borrowed time, finally meeting her end off Okinawa in May 1945.
But RO-108, patrolling her assigned area 110 nautical miles northeast of Seadadler Harbor, never got the message. Or, if she did, her captain chose to remain at his station. Perhaps his radio was damaged. Perhaps he felt duty-bound to maintain his post. Perhaps he simply never received the transmission. Whatever the reason, RO-108 stayed where she was, and England was coming. RO-108 already had American blood on her hands. On October 3, 1943, it fired a perfect spread of torpedoes at 3 American destroyers in Huon Gulf off New Guinea. USS Smith had evaded, combing the torpedo wakes through aggressive maneuvering, but USS Henley, an older destroyer that had survived Pearl Harbor, wasn't so lucky. 2 Type 95 torpedoes struck Henley amidships, breaking her keel. The destroyer broke in 2 and sank in 8 minutes. It was a textbook submarine attack. Patient stalking, perfect positioning, deadly execution.
2 months later, RO-108 had survived her own brush with death. A PBY Catalina caught her on the surface on December 17, 1943, and straddled her with depth charges. The damage was severe. Ruptured hull plates, flooded compartments, loss of depth control. RO-108 had gone down by the stern, taking on tons of water. But heroic damage control saved her. Working in flooded compartments up to their waists in oily seawater, her crew had shored up bulkheads, patched leaks, and somehow kept the submarine from sinking. She'd limped back to truck for months of repairs. Lieutenant Osari Konichi commanded her now. He was experienced, capable, and knew his submarine could be killed. He'd nearly lost her once. He wouldn't make the same mistakes again. But against England, even experience and caution wouldn't be enough. At 23:03 hours on May 26th, Robbie gained radar contact at 15,000 yards. RO-108 on the surface, charging batteries under cover of darkness. The submarine's radar detector screamed its warning, crash dive. The now familiar drill executed flawlessly. RO-108 submerged in less than 45 seconds, textbook performance. But England already had sonar contact at 1,650 yards. Commander Howe signaled Robbie to make the first attack, perhaps give another ship a chance at the kill, perhaps save England's Hedgehog projectiles for later targets. Robbie moved in, fired her salvo. Miss. RO-108 had turned inside the attack, a perfectly timed maneuver. At 23:23, England closed for her attack run. There would be no long hunt this time, no hours of cat and mouse. England's crew had become surgical in their precision. They'd killed 4 submarines in 8 days. They knew their business. Fire. Between 4 and 6 Hedgehog projectiles found their mark. The explosions came so close together they sounded like a single massive detonation. RO-108's hull, already weakened from her previous battle damage 7 months earlier, couldn't withstand the punishment. She broke apart and sank immediately. 53 men died, including Lieutenant Osari. Some were killed instantly by the concussion. Others drowned as compartments flooded in seconds. None survived. The action from first contact to final destruction, 20 minutes. 5 submarines, 9 days. England was becoming a legend. But the final kill, the record breaker, would be the hardest fight yet. RO-105 never received the warning. Or perhaps Lieutenant Junichi Ino did receive it, but chose to stay at his post. The submarine had Captain Ryunosuke Kato embarked, commander of Submarine Division 51. Having a division commander aboard made abandoning the patrol area nearly impossible without explicit orders. RO-105 had her own combat history. She'd narrowly dodged 2 torpedoes fired by USS Tarpon in August 1943, a stern chase where her lookout spotted the wakes just in time.
She'd fired her own torpedoes at the light cruiser USS Columbia in September 1943, missing when the cruiser evaded. She'd rescued downed Japanese pilots on multiple occasions, surfacing in daylight near enemy positions to pull aviators from the water. Her crew was experienced, her captain was skilled, and she carried a division commander who would not abandon his duty lightly. After sinking RO-108, England and her sisters needed to replenish their nearly exhausted stocks of Hedgehog projectiles. They proceeded to Sea Adler Harbor at Manus in the Admiralty Highlands for rapid resupply. The replenishment was done with urgent efficiency. Ammunition lighters came alongside even before the ships tied up. Working parties formed human chains, passing Hedgehog projectiles from hand to hand from the lighters to the ship's magazines. No time for proper cargo handling, no time for rest. There were still submarines out there. While at Manus, the destroyer escorts joined a larger hunter-kill task group built around the escort carrier USS Hoggett Bay. The carrier added aircraft to the hunt. TBF Avenger torpedo bombers equipped with radar and depth charges, able to search vast areas of ocean and vector surface ships to contacts. Also joining were destroyers USS Hazelwood, USS McCord, USS Heermann, and USS Hull, plus destroyer escort USS Spangler. It was becoming a squadron-sized operation. The Navy was taking the submarine threat seriously. Intelligence reported that 2 submarines from the NA line remained at their stations. The hunters were determined to get them all. On the night of May 30th-31st, Hazelwood gained radar contact on what would prove to be RO-105. The submarine crash-dived immediately and began the longest, most desperate fight of any submarine in the NA line. RO-105's captain pulled every trick imaginable. The submarine discharged debris through her torpedo tubes, wood, cork, clothing, creating false sonar targets. It released oil from damaged ballast tanks, simulating catastrophic damage to make the Americans think she'd been hit. It executed maneuvers so violent they pushed the submarine's hull to its structural limits, risking collapse to avoid the hedgehog patterns. Through the night of May 30th, multiple ships took turns attacking. Hazelwood gained contact and dropped conventional depth charges. The explosions sent geysers of water erupting into the darkness, but RO-108 evaded. George made several hedgehog runs. One salvo scored what appeared to be 3 hits, small explosions heard on sonar. But incredibly, RO-108 continued maneuvering. The hits had caused damage and casualties, but not enough to kill the submarine. Japanese submarines were tough. Strong pressure hulls, multiple watertight compartments, excellent damage control. RO-105 was taking a beating, but staying in the fight. As dawn broke on May 31st, the hunters had been pursuing RO-105 for more than 7 hours. The submarine had been submerged the entire time, running on batteries that should have been exhausted long ago. Her crew had to be approaching the limits of endurance, breathing foul air, working in damaged compartments, knowing that each attack might be the one that killed them. Spangler and England joined the pack at first light. The sunrise revealed a calm sea with a spreading oil slick marking where the submarine had been damaged, but sonar still held contact. RO-105 was hurt, but still fighting. Spangler made a hedgehog run, miss. The submarine turned at the last moment, still responsive, still maneuverable, despite hours of pounding.
Commander Howe, observing from George, had seen enough. He knew which ship would finish this. His signal to England would become part of naval legend. Oh hell! Go ahead, England. It was both acknowledgement and exasperation. Acknowledgement that England had become the most effective submarine killer in the fleet. Exasperation that this submarine refused to die despite a night-long pounding. Lieutenant Commander Pendleton brought in England for what would be her sixth and final submarine kill. Her crew was exhausted, but focused. They'd been at battle stations for hours, manning the same positions, running the same procedures, but they never wavered. Lieutenant Williamson had the attack team. He'd been analyzing RO-105's evasion patterns all night. Even through exhaustion and damage, patterns emerged. A slight hesitation before major turns. A preference for certain depth bands when under extreme pressure. Small tells that gave away the captain's thinking. "We've got him," Williamson told Pendleton. "He's running on fumes. One more good hit and he's done." England closed to firing range. The Hedgehog crew loaded their last full salvo. 24 projectiles. One more pattern. "Range 400 yards," the sonar operator reported. "Target depth 180 feet. Bearing 315. He's slowing, sir. Battery's dying." The plot team had their solution. Everyone was ready. Fire. The Hedgehog projectiles arced forward one last time, splashing into the water in their elliptical pattern. They sank through the clear tropical water toward RO-105, still fighting, still evading, still hoping for a miracle that wouldn't come. Between 6 and 10 projectiles struck home. The explosions merged into a catastrophic roar that was heard on ships miles away. But it was what happened next that made this kill different. RO-105's torpedoes detonated. Secondary explosions ripped through the submarine as her own weapons, armed and ready for a last-ditch attack, exploded when Hedgehog projectiles breached the torpedo room. The detonations added their fury to the Hedgehog strikes. A column of water shot hundreds of feet into the air. The shock wave rolled through the ocean, rattling every ship in the area. On England's bridge, men instinctively ducked as spray rained down on them. RO-105 was blown to pieces, not just destroyed, obliterated. Her pressure hull shattered, her compartments crushed, her crew killed instantly by overpressure or drowned in seconds as the ocean claimed what was left. Captain Cato died with his division. All 55 hands perished. Some were killed by the Hedgehog hits, more died when the torpedoes detonated, the rest drowned as the shattered remains of RO-105 plunged to the bottom, 2,800 feet below. The oil slick that rose to the surface spread for miles. Debris bobbed up, pieces of the pressure hull large enough to identify by their curvature, wooden deck grating, life preservers with Japanese characters, personal effects. One piece of debris would be recovered and preserved. A section of RO-105's conning tower with the submarine's identification number still visible. Physical proof of the kill. Physical proof of England's extraordinary achievement. At 07:36 hours on May 31, 1944, USS England had achieved what no other warship in naval history had accomplished. 6 enemy submarines sunk in 12 days. The news rippled through the Pacific Fleet like electricity. Destroyer Escort sinks 6 submarines in less than 2 weeks. Ship's crews discussed it in mess halls. Pilots talked about it in ready rooms. Even battleship sailors, who normally looked down on the smaller tin cans, spoke of England with respect. Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Ernest J. King, who rarely praised anyone or anything, sent a message that would be framed and hung in England's wardroom. There'll always be an England in the United States Navy. It was more than recognition. It was a promise. The Navy would never let the name England disappear from its rolls, would never forget what Ensign John Charles England had done at Pearl Harbor or what USS England DE-365
had accomplished in his memory. The Presidential Unit citation followed, one of only 3 destroyer escort crews in World War II to receive this honor. The citation read in part, "For extraordinary heroism in action against enemy Japanese submarines in the Pacific War area from May 19 to May 31, 1944. Operating in dangerous waters infested with enemy naval units, the USS England repeatedly detected and destroyed hostile submarines with aggressive and skillful anti-submarine warfare techniques. Displaying superb seamanship, expert marksmanship, and outstanding courage in the face of enemy action, the England and her gallant officers and men contributed materially to the success of our submarine warfare campaign in the Pacific and upheld the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service." Lieutenant Commander Pendleton received the Navy Cross. But many historians have noted that Lieutenant John Williamson deserved equal credit. As executing officer, Williamson had been the driving force behind England's training and tactical proficiency. His endless drills, his insistence on perfection, his tactical analysis during the attacks, these had made England success. The crew knew it. When Williamson was later promoted and given command of England, taking over from Pendleton, the crew cheered. He was one of them, a Mustang who'd risen from enlisted ranks, who understood what made a crew great, who had trained them to be killers. But the Navy tried to keep England's achievement secret, not because they didn't want to celebrate, but because they didn't want to reveal how they'd found the submarines. If the Japanese realized American codebreakers had penetrated JN-25, they might change their codes, cutting off a vital intelligence source.
So the cover story held. Aerial reconnaissance had spotted the submarines. Aggressive patrolling had done the rest. England and her sisters had simply been in the right place at the right time, executing textbook anti-submarine procedures. The Japanese, however, weren't fooled. Their own radio intelligence had intercepted enough American transmissions to piece together what had happened. Internal Japanese naval reports, decoded after the war, acknowledged that American codebreakers had compromised their submarine operations. But Japanese military culture prevented them from fully addressing the problem. Admitting that their codes were compromised meant admitting failure by the communications security services. It meant questioning the competence of senior officers who had assured everyone the codes were unbreakable. Japanese institutional pride made them suppress what their intelligence officers knew. So JN-25 remained in use, and American codebreakers continued reading Japanese messages for the rest of the war. The intelligence windfall from that decision would contribute to countless American victories. The destruction of the NA Line submarine picket accomplished far more than just removing 7 submarines from the Japanese order of battle. It triggered a chain of strategic consequences that would help doom Japan's last chance for a decisive naval victory. When Vice Admiral Tagagi reported the loss of the NA Line, Combined Fleet Headquarters faced a troubling question. Where were the American carriers going? The submarines had been positioned to detect carrier task forces heading for the Western Carolines or Western New Guinea. Their destruction suggested a major American force had passed through the area. But passed through heading where? Admiral Toyota and his staff made a fateful assumption. The Americans were heading for the Western Carolines, Palau and Yap. This made strategic sense. Seizing these islands would cut Japan's supply lines to the Philippines and New Guinea. It fit with MacArthur's westward advance. Orders went out immediately for Operation A-Go, the decisive battle that would stop the American advance. Japanese fleet units sorted from various bases, heading for positions to intercept American forces near the Western Carolines. Precious fuel was consumed, fuel that Japan, with its merchant fleet decimated by American submarines, could barely spare.
But the Americans weren't heading for the Western Carolines. They were heading for the Marianas, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, islands that were 1,200 miles from where the Japanese fleet was positioning itself. The loss of the submarine picket line had blinded Japan to American intentions at the critical moment. By the time Japanese reconnaissance aircraft spotted the American invasion fleet approaching Saipan on June 13, 1944, it was too late. The Japanese fleet scrambled to reposition. Ships raced north toward the Marianas, burning fuel at maximum speed. The carefully planned defensive battle became an improvised response. Units arrived piecemeal instead of concentrated. Coordination suffered. The decisive battle would be fought on American terms, not Japanese. On June 15, 1944, American Marines stormed ashore on Saipan. The Japanese garrison fought with suicidal determination. 28,000 Japanese soldiers would die defending the island, but the outcome was never in doubt. American material superiority was overwhelming. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commanding the Japanese mobile fleet, sorted to attack the American carrier task forces supporting the invasion. What followed would be called the Battle of the Philippine Sea, but American pilots had another name for it, the Marianas Turkey Shoot. On June 19, 20, 1944, American carrier aircraft slaughtered Japanese air groups. The new F-6F Hellcat fighters, piloted by superbly trained aviators, shot down Japanese planes at ratios of 10-to-1 and higher. Over 400 Japanese aircraft were destroyed against minimal American losses. American submarines, hunting Japanese ships with the same decoded intelligence that had found the NA line, sank 2 Japanese carriers, Shokaku and Teiho. Aircraft from Task Force 58 sank a 3rd carrier, Hio. The battle destroyed Japanese naval aviation as an effective force. Japan would never again be able to conduct large-scale carrier operations. The Marianas fell to American control, and with them came the ability to base B-29 Superfortress bombers within range of the Japanese home islands. Starting in November 1944, waves of B-29s would begin systematic destruction of Japan's cities and industry. The strategic bombing campaign would kill hundreds of thousands and eventually deliver atomic weapons to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The road from RO-105's destruction on May 31, 1944, to Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, wasn't direct. Many other factors contributed to Japan's defeat, but the destruction of the NA Line submarine picket was a link in that chain, perhaps a crucial one.
If even one submarine had survived to report the American carriers heading toward the Marianas, if the Japanese fleet had positioned itself correctly to intercept, if Operation A-Go had been thought under conditions favorable to Japan. History doesn't deal in what-ifs, but it's worth noting that England's success in destroying the submarine picket line helped ensure that the Battle of the Philippine Sea would be fought on American terms. And that battle, in turn, sealed Japan's fate. For USS England, the 6th submarine killing spree was not the end of her war, but rather the high point of a longer service career. After replenishment at Monos, England continued anti-submarine patrols in the Southwest Pacific. She escorted convoys, screened amphibious operations, and hunted for submarines that never materialized. The Japanese had learned their lesson. Surviving submarines stayed deep and silent, avoiding the destroyer escorts that had proven so deadly. In October 1944, England participated in the Leyte Gulf operation, screening the invasion fleet as American forces returned to the Philippines. She was present during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history, though she didn't engage in the main action. Her job was protecting the vulnerable transports and supply ships that made the invasion possible. On May 9, 1945, England was operating off Okinawa when she suffered damage that would change her role. A Japanese kamikaze aircraft, already burning from anti-aircraft fire, crashed into the water alongside England. The aircraft's bomb exploded near the ship's hull, causing significant underwater damage. The explosion buckled hull plates, flooded compartments, and damaged England's propulsion system. She took on a list and lost power. For a moment, it looked like the ship that had survived 6 submarine hunts might sink from a near-miss aircraft bomb. But England's damage control parties, trained to the same standard of excellence as her anti-submarine team, saved the ship. They shored up bulkheads, controlled flooding, and kept her afloat. England limped into port on her own power, battered but unbeaten. Repairs would take months, and by the time England was ready to return to service, the war was over. She never made it back to the combat zone before Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945. England returned to the United States in November 1945, sailing into San Francisco Bay where she'd been built 3 years earlier. The shipyard workers who'd built her lined the pier, waving and cheering. The local newspapers ran stories about the ship that had sunk 6 submarines. England was a celebrity. But the post-war Navy had no need for hundreds of destroyer escorts. The vast fleet built to win the war was being mothballed as quickly as it could be processed. On October 15, 1945, just 2 months after the Japanese surrender, USS England was decommissioned and placed in reserve. She would be sold for scrap in 1946, cut up for the steel that had served so well. Her fighting days were over, but her legacy was just beginning. The story of USS England is inseparable from the story of the Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar. The weapon had proven itself in combat, and post-war analysis would confirm its revolutionary impact on naval warfare. British and American naval officers compiled statistics from thousands of anti-submarine attacks during World War II. The numbers told a stark story. Conventional depth charge attacks sank 1 submarine for every 60 to 100 attacks. Success rate 1 to 2%. Hedgehog attacks sank 1 submarine for every 5 to 6 attacks. Success rate 18 to 20%. The improvement was dramatic, a 10-fold increase in lethality, but the raw numbers only told part of the story. The Hedgehog's ability to maintain continuous sonar contact, its rapid reload time, and contact-fused warheads combined to create a weapon system that transformed submarine hunting from an art to a science. Post-war submarine development would be shaped by the Hedgehog's lessons. The ability to attack ahead while maintaining sonar contact became the standard for all anti-submarine weapons. Modern navies would develop torpedo systems, rocket-propelled depth charges, and helicopter-dropped weapons, all incorporating the key insights proven by the Hedgehog. Even today, modern anti-submarine weapons use contact or proximity fuses rather than depth fuses, allowing attacking forces to maintain sensor contact and avoid self-induced acoustic blindness. The Hedgehog's influence extends from World War II destroyer escorts to 21st-century nuclear submarines. England's 6 submarine kills demonstrated the Hedgehog's potential under ideal conditions: well-trained crew, excellent intelligence, and aggressive tactics. But even ships with less perfect circumstances found the Hedgehog dramatically improved their success rates. By war's end, nearly 200 Allied warships had been equipped with Hedgehogs. They were credited with sinking over 100 Axis submarines, roughly 20% of all submarines sunk by surface ships during the war. No other weapon system could claim such a high kill ratio. For decades after the war, USS England existed only in memory. Veterans held reunions, their numbers dwindling each year. They told stories of the 12 days in May 1944 when their ship had accomplished the impossible. Younger people listened politely, but the passage of time made those events seem increasingly distant and abstract.
In 1963, the Navy honored Admiral King's promise. A new ship was commissioned, USS England, CG-22, a guided missile cruiser. The name continued. The legacy lived on. CG-22 would serve for 31 years, participating in Vietnam War operations, Cold War patrols, and Operation Desert Storm. She was decommissioned in 1994 and eventually sunk as a target in 2004. But even before she was gone, the Navy was planning a third England. DDG-134, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, was authorized in 2015 and laid down in 2017. This newest England, still under construction as of 2024, will carry the name into the 21st century. Admiral King's promise remains kept. But what of the original England? What of DE-635 and her 6 victims? The submarines she sank, I-16, RO-106, RO-104, RO-116, RO-108, and RO-105, rested undisturbed in the deep for more than 70 years. Their exact positions were known only approximately, based on navigation fixes taken in 1944 using celestial navigation and dead reckoning. Then, in the 2010s, a new chapter opened. Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen, using his vast wealth to fund deep ocean exploration, formed a research team and acquired the research vessel Petrel. Allen's mission was to locate and document World War II shipwrecks in the Pacific, giving closure to families and preserving history. In March 2018, Petrel located USS Lexington. The carrier sunk at the Battle of the Coral Sea. In August 2018, they found USS Juno, sunk off Guadalcanal, with the loss of 5 Sullivan brothers. The discoveries kept coming. USS Hornet, USS Wasp, Japanese battleship He, dozens of other warships. Among their targets, the submarines sunk by USS England. Finding them would require sophisticated deep ocean search technology, side-scan sonar to map the seafloor, remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, with high-definition cameras, navigation systems far more accurate than anything available in 1944. Petrel's team started with the best positions available from Navy records, then conducted systematic searches of areas several miles across. The Pacific is vast, and the deep ocean hides its secrets well. But one by one, they found them. The images sent back by the ROVs were haunting. The submarines lay on the bottom, often upright, looking almost intact from a distance. Only on closer inspection did the catastrophic damage become apparent. Holes blown in pressure hulls, torn metal where hedgehog projectiles had struck. Some submarines broken into sections. But they were identifiable. Hull numbers were still visible on some. Distinctive features confirmed their identities. And around each wreck spread a debris field, the detritus of violent death frozen in place for 70 years. The discoveries brought closure to Japanese families who had never known their relatives' fate, gave historians physical evidence to confirm the written records, provided solemn reminders that these were not just statistics, but graves where hundreds of men died doing their duty. The submarine wrecks are protected sites now, designated as war graves under international law. No salvage is permitted. No artifacts can be removed. The submarines and the men who died in them are to rest undisturbed. But they've been found. They've been documented. The physical evidence confirms the story that veterans had told for decades. USS England sank 6 submarines in 12 days, and here they are, proof that the impossible actually happened. The numbers are stark and sobering. 408 Japanese submariners killed in the 6 submarines England destroyed. 408 men who left port expecting to serve their country, watch for enemy ships, and return home when their patrol ended. Instead, they found death in the depths. Each submarine carried its own stories, young sailors on their first patrol, writing letters home they'd never send. Veteran chiefs who'd survived previous battles, wondering if their luck would hold one more time. Officers responsible for dozens of men's lives, making decisions under impossible pressure. When a submarine dies, death comes in many forms. Some men are killed instantly by the concussion when hedgehog projectiles breach the hull. The explosive force in that confined space is unsurvivable. Others die when compartments flood in seconds, seawater roaring in at lethal pressure. Some are trapped in air pockets as the submarine sinks, drowning slowly as water rises, or dying when the pressure hull collapses. It's not a clean death, not a quick death, not a peaceful death.
The Japanese submariners fought hard. They used every tactic, every trick, every desperate measure to survive. Some came agonizingly close to escape, evading attack after attack before the final salvo found them. Others died quickly, overwhelmed before they could even attempt evasion. But they all died, every single one. No survivors, no prisoners. No one to tell the story from their perspective. On the American side, England's crew lived. All 186 of them survived the war, a remarkable fact for a warship that saw significant combat. But they paid a psychological price for their success. In post-war interviews, England veterans spoke of conflicting emotions, pride in their achievement, satisfaction at doing their job well, but also discomfort at being celebrated for killing. "We were doing what we were trained to do," one sailor said decades later. "Those Japanese submarines would have killed Americans if they'd had the chance. It was war, but that doesn't mean we enjoyed it. We killed over 400 men. That's something you carry with you." Others were more direct. "They were the enemy. They bombed Pearl Harbor. They killed our guys all across the Pacific. We were glad to send them to hell." Both reactions are valid. War creates moral complexity that can't be reduced to simple formulas. The Japanese submariners were serving their country, doing their duty, fighting for what they believed was right. So were the Americans hunting them. That both sides were honorable men doing their duty makes the tragedy deeper, not shallower. Ensign John Charles England, whose heroic death gave the destroyer Escort its name, would have understood. He died saving Japanese Americans, yes, Japanese Americans, trapped aboard USS Oklahoma. In the chaos of Pearl Harbor, England didn't check anyone's ancestry before trying to rescue them. He just saw shipmates who needed help. That spirit, seeing common humanity even in the midst of war, is perhaps the deepest legacy his namesake ship could carry. The story of USS England and her unprecedented anti-submarine success offers lessons that resonate beyond naval warfare or World War II history. First, intelligence wins wars. The codebreakers who decrypted Japanese naval messages were as important to England's success as the Hedgehog crews who fired the weapons. Without knowing where the submarines would be, England might have patrolled for months without a single contact. Intelligence gave them targets. Technology gave them tools. Training gave them skills. Together, these elements created success. Modern military operations rely even more heavily on intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Satellites, signals intelligence, cyber operations, all descendants of the same principle that guided Frupac's codebreakers in 1944. See the enemy before they see you. Know where they are before they know where you are. Information is power. Second, technology matters, but only when combined with skill. The Hedgehog was revolutionary, but it required expert operation to be effective. England's crew practiced until Hedgehog attacks became automatic. They drilled until they could execute perfect attacks under the stress of combat. Other ships had Hedgehogs and did not achieve similar success because their crews hadn't achieved the same level of proficiency. Modern militaries spend billions on advanced weapons systems, but those systems are only as effective as the people operating them. Training, drilling, practice, the boring, repetitive work that builds competence remains as important today as it was in 1944. Third, persistence overcomes adversity. England's first submarine kill, I-16,
required 5 attack runs. RO-104 required hours of hunting. RO-105 took an entire night and multiple ships. England's crew could have given up after early misses, could have assumed the targets were too difficult, could have waited for someone else to take over. Instead, they kept attacking, kept refining their approach, kept learning from each attempt, and eventually they succeeded. Fourth, ordinary people accomplish extraordinary things. England's crew weren't special forces, weren't hand-picked elite warriors. They were farm boys and factory workers, high school graduates and college dropouts. Average Americans who volunteered or were drafted, trained by other average Americans, fighting a war that needed millions of ordinary people to do extraordinary things. This is perhaps the most important lesson. Heroism isn't the province of superhumans. Excellence isn't reserved for the naturally gifted. Given proper training, clear leadership, and meaningful purpose, ordinary people can achieve the impossible. The 6 submarines England sank in 12 days weren't destroyed by some wonder weapon or tactical genius. They were destroyed by 186 young Americans who learned their jobs, did them well, and never quit. That's a lesson that transcends naval warfare, that applies to any field where excellence matters, that should inspire anyone facing a challenge that seems insurmountable. In the vast Pacific Ocean, in waters so deep that sunlight never reaches the bottom, 6 Japanese submarines rest where they fell in May 1944. Coral grows on their hulls now. Fish swim through their passages. The men who died there are bones and dust, returned to the elements.
But their story lives on, and so does England's. The original USS England, DE 635, was scrapped in 1946, but the name England has sailed continuously in the U.S. Navy since 1943. The guided missile cruiser, CG-22, served from 1963 to 1994. The destroyer, DDG-134, will carry the name forward into the 21st century. Admiral King kept his promise. There will always be an England in the United States Navy. And perhaps that's fitting, because England represents something larger than one ship or one crew or even one extraordinary 12-day period. England represents the capability of free people to rise to great challenges, to innovate, to persist, to achieve the impossible through preparation, skill, and determination. The 6 submarine kills will never be matched. That record has stood for 80 years and will likely stand forever. Modern anti-submarine warfare is conducted with helicopters, long-range torpedoes, and network-centric warfare systems. The close-range hunts of World War II belong to history. But the lessons remain relevant. The story remains inspiring. And the name England remains a reminder that when America needed destroyers, ordinary Americans built them. When those destroyers needed crews, ordinary Americans manned them. And when those crews faced the enemy, they achieved extraordinary things. In May 1944, over 12 days in the tropical waters of the Southwest Pacific, USS England and her crew wrote a page in naval history that will never be equaled. 6 submarines in 12 days, a record that stands alone, an achievement that honors the name of a young officer who gave his life saving others at Pearl Harbor. They called her machine gun cruiser Helena for her rapid fire. England earned no such nickname. She didn't need one. Her record speaks for itself. 6 submarines, 12 days, 1 ship. USS England, the submarine killer that changed naval history.